Okay, folks, I think I'm going to go ahead and get started since we're at the top of the hour. I like being punctual. I'm Lou Abernethy. My company is AMP Creative, and at AMP, we design learning experiences and communication experiences for clients. So I'm a designer, and my company is full of designers, and I'm going to welcome you all into that community today. We are all designers today. And we're going to design this experience together over the next hour. And I'll talk a little bit about what I'm hoping we're all able to do as designers today. I want us to have a designer's mindset. And just in case you're like, hey, you know, I'm no designer, humans are. I think that's what really sets us apart in a lot of ways, is that we all have access to design solutions to problems. And I know that as a business owner, you've designed many solutions to many problems. So I want us all to embrace sort of 4 major hallmarks of a designer's mindset today. We're all beginners here today. We're going to embrace the beginner's mind. Me included. I'm going to share some experiences that I've had and some insights that I've gained, but I definitely look forward to learning from you. I'm definitely a beginner on this journey as I learn more about perspective taking and become a better designer through every experience I have. So we're all beginners. I want us to be really curious. I want us to ask why. I want us to kind of take a look inside of ourselves. And if we feel some discomfort about something, or if we feel challenged by an idea, I want us to just be curious about that and consider that. I want us to be open to surprise. I think that really great designers are excited by unexpected outcomes. And one of the reasons we get so excited about unexpected outcomes is because we need new insights to innovate and create new solutions for people. So when something happens that isn't quite what you expected, think of that as a gift that might open you up to new solutions. And last of all, as designers, we're always growing and learning. So I'm wondering if in our session today, we could all commit to those four hallmarks. And in the chat, you can just say yes, or let's do it, or give me some sort of a positive sign that you're in to being a designer for our session. What do you say? Okay, Marianne is ready for surprise. Sandra says yes. Anybody else along on this journey? All right, Vanessa, thank you. Yes, Robin. Okay, let's do it. Definitely. All right, here we go. Thank you, Sil. Yes, let's get going. So this is what we're going to do today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I discovered perspective taking. I have discovering in quotes because it's been there all along, folks. It's just something that was a surprise to me. I want to talk about what it means to be powered by perspective taking and the benefits that we gain. We'll talk about a perspective taking technique and what blocks us from really gaining perspective of others. And then we'll have some breakouts where you can talk with one another and explore some of these activities and ideas. And we're gonna zoom along, so we'll get going. Okay, so perspective taking. What is it? How did I come across this? What are we talking about today? Well, I mentioned that my company designs learning experiences. And several years ago, we had a client who wanted to make a big bet, a big experiment, and talk about VR, virtual reality. How can virtual reality be used in learning? We were so grateful and lucky to have this relationship with this client and to have them trust us to do some research and development for them around VR in learning. So we decided as we studied this modality, what would be really impactful would be to use immersive reality to understand more about bias and diversity in the workplace. And so we developed a VR experience using virtual reality, where you walk in the shoes of someone experiencing workplace discrimination. So you actually see scenes from the workplace over a series of several years, and you understand the cumulative impact of discrimination in the workplace from the perspective of someone experiencing it. So sounds pretty pretty impactful, and it definitely was. But I was really surprised by what happened, because what would happen is people would put on the headset, they would go through these things, and our hypothesis is that it would raise awareness of the impact of bias. We were definitely right, but it did something much more, something much deeper. What I, as a learning specialist, recognized was that people would take off that headset and they would be ready to engage in deep conversations and to take action to change the systems in the workplace that allowed discrimination to happen. And we found that we could create workshops where hundreds of people would go through this experience. Leaders in a company, say, they would take off the headset and they would be ready to really engage in deep, impactful structural changes in the workplace. And I was like, what is causing this fertile, amazing, sensitive, cognitive period? Why? Why are people acting this way? What impact is this having on folks? And that's when I discovered the term perspective taking. I discovered a very deep body of work and research that's been done around perspective taking. Again, I say I discovered it, but obviously, you know, it's a whole continent that was laying there just waiting for someone, for me to stumble across it and say, and for it to provide insight to me. And perspective taking, I learned, is the active contemplation of others' psychological experiences. So taking someone else's perspective. Let me ask all of you out there, are there times in your life where you consciously stop and decide that you're going to try to understand someone else's perspective? I'm just curious how many folks just sort of naturally do that. And I'm looking at the chat right now to see if anybody's like, that's me, or not really, I'm just really busy and it never occurs to me. What do you think? Okay, Sandra says every day. All right, Sandra. Anyone else? Yes, no? Many times every day. Thank you, Hannah. Good deal. Some of the time, but not often enough. Sure, it's my normal. Excellent. Anyone not find that they naturally do this? Maybe no one else has that experience. You know, certainly perspective taking is one of those things like design. It's the domain of the whole human family. We all can very naturally sometimes engage in perspective taking. Our brains are to some extent kind of built for it. There are people, sometimes folks describe them as being very empathic, and they just get sucked into other people's perspective very, very easily. But we've got a whole spectrum of neurodiversity, and there are other people who find that they really need to work with frameworks and strengthen that perspective taking muscle. So today we're going to talk about some techniques that can help us strengthen that perspective taking muscle. And this is why it's so important. You know, we can really be powered by perspective. I am trying to come back here and tell you a little bit about the research around perspective taking. So researchers would set up, I've read many studies where researchers set up experiments and they wanted people to engage in perspective taking. And the way that they would ask people to engage in perspective taking is with a really simple cue. They would say, like, you know, we're going to put together a negotiation, or sometimes, you know, people wouldn't know what was going to happen, but there would be a negotiation set up or some sort of social interaction set up. And subjects would be cued, consider the perspective of the other person involved here. So sometimes it would be that simple. Other times they would ask the subjects to maybe write a journal entry from the perspective of this other person, or to engage in some sort of exercise. And the pro-social effects of perspective taking from these experiments is incredible. This template that I have, it has 6 slots. So I have 6 examples of pro-social effects, but I tell you, if I had a template with 20 slots, there would be 20 examples of how incredible it is, the positive outcomes that happen when we engage in perspective taking. It counteracts expressions of bias. And although this particular study that I'm citing here was around racial bias, we're going to talk about bias as a whole during this next, during our session. And we'll see that bias doesn't always, it's not always about like a racial bias sort of thing, but across the board, engaging in perspective taking, actively contemplating someone else's psychological experience will counteract some of the natural biases that we have and decrease implicit bias. It increases team creativity. So I think this is really exciting, and it really talks about the business value of perspective taking when you can consider that innovation comes out of engaging in perspective taking with teams in the workplace. It stabilizes marriages and relationships of all sorts, right? So perspective taking, again, it's like win, 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 win. Why wouldn't we do this? It improves the outcomes of conflict resolution, where both parties leave feeling that the outcome was a positive one. And it creates successful leaders. And when I think about us as business leaders who need all the help we can get, engaging in perspective taking is really accessible to us. So I want to talk a little bit about the need, and about the fact that although virtual reality led me to really understanding more about the power of perspective taking, it is something that we can engage in that requires no technology whatsoever. Now, certainly having something like virtual reality is amazing. Because virtual reality is a frictionless perspective taking experience, and it doesn't require motivation or skill. But engaging in a framework like I'm going to give you a little insight in today certainly increases our success in perspective taking and helps us reap those pro-social benefits that I just shared. So the need, when do we need to engage in perspective taking? I'll share a quick example, and I'd like for you to think of a need. You know, those of you who are like, I do it every day, I'd love to hear more and for you to share in chat some of the times that you engage in perspective taking. So recently, we have a pandemic. We have we're in the middle of a civil rights movement that is causing a lot of change in our culture, in our workplaces. We have remote working happening for the first time, many of us. Others of us have a lot of risk when in working. We've got a lot going on. And so I've been having regular check-ins with my employees where my team members, where before we meet, I just consciously give myself a few minutes to consider their point of view and their perspective. And it's been making a world of difference and really helping to center me on their needs. And I'm really curious, I would really love for you, share the pro-social benefits again. Loy is asking for me to share the pro-social benefits again. I'll go back to that slide really quickly, Loy, if that's helpful to you. And if you want to reach out to me afterwards, I'm happy to share these citations with you as well. Just like so much amazing literature. But what I would like to do right now is have some people share in chat, or you could just write it down. If you don't share it in chat, I want you to write it down on your own. And I want you to write down an example of a time when perspective taking did benefit you or would have benefited you. And I've got a little bar across the bottom there that's going to grow. We've got 1 minute for people to share. Oh, I see Sandra was was replying to Loy. So I'd really love to see some examples in chat of when perspective taking would have benefited you or did benefit you, engaging in perspective taking. All right, folks, I gotta say, it's been a minute and nobody shared anything in chat. I'm about to have us all turn on our microphones and our cameras and like do a little dance together or something. Come on, are you there? Let's do it. Here we go. Sandy says, when I loaned another business money for a new venture, we had worked. Oh my goodness, Sandy, I'm so sorry. That is quite. So Sandy shares, when I loaned another business money for a new venture, we had worked together well in the past, lost 40K on the deal. He's disappeared. Wow, really interesting. So perspective taking in that sense, you're thinking it might have helped you see around that corner, possibly. Interesting. I know, we're all like, oh, Sandy, so sorry. Sandra said, when an employee was offended by an email and I told them to say it out loud and another voice intonation, told him to say it out loud. Oh, gotcha. So reading an email got misinterpreted, it sounded like, in that sense. So perspective taking either did or could have benefited you there. Can anyone think of a time that perspective taking wouldn't benefit them? Is really maybe a better question. But I do want you to all have an example of when perspective taking would have, could have, did benefit you, because we're going to use that example in our breakout session. And in order for you to get some goodness out of that breakout session, you need to consider this. So Sandy, thank you for sharing that example. Sandra, thank you for sharing that example as well. Let's talk about what it means to engage in perspective taking. I think that I did perspective benefit before saying yes, says Marianne. Perspective benefit. Oh, interesting. Maybe Marianne, do you want to turn on your microphone and tell me? I'm curious about your comment there and what you might have meant.
Sure. Good morning, Amy Lou. Thanks.
Hello.
Great to see you. I remember we did Platinum Supplier together, WBEC West, so I'm thrilled to listen to you this morning. You're doing a great job.
Oh, thank you.
What I meant about this is many of us are quick to say yes to others or quick to say yes to clients because it's just easier to say yes than no or modify your yes. So was just listening to you today intentionally to learn how to say yes, maybe, and no, or reframe in a better way.
Interesting. Yeah, well, that's a really interesting point of view, and I'd love to hear your feedback after this to see if this was helpful for you considering that. I think we're talking about perspective taking today for sure, but there's a flip to this, which is pretty easy to flip once you kind of understand it, which is perspective giving also, which is like so incredibly important. So and that might work in a little bit to what you're talking about there. But let's talk a little bit about perspective taking, a technique, a framework. If your normal go-to is just like, I wonder what things are like from their perspective, and you don't have a way to work through it and you would like one, here's a potential way to work through it. To seek understanding, to ideate around what they might be thinking and come up with a hypothesis, and then to test and iterate what that means. So I'm going to step through this kind of quickly, and then we'll talk about what keeps us from doing this. I'm so acutely aware of how little we can get done in an hour, especially when I want to give people a chance to work in breakout groups. But here's my framework, and this is something that I teach in like a day-long workshop. So obviously we're just going to take a little taste of it today. But at the center of the framework of the perspective taking technique, at the center is the person whose perspective you are engaging with, whose perspective you're trying to take. At the center is the person who you're actively contemplating their psychological experience. And I think it's really, really important to consider that we are centering them, because perspective taking is about taking things from this place that we just travel in, and this perspective that we can't get away from, which is our own, but we're trying to push out our abilities and really understand and engage with someone else. So they're at the center. And we seek understanding. We're trying to let go of our ego for a moment and really engage with their lived experience and the way they are perceiving the world. And we're gonna come up with some ideas, right? Like maybe it's this, maybe it's that, perhaps this is what's going on. These are assumptions. They're definitely not the real thing. They're as close as we can get. And we're gonna come up with a lot of ideas until we get a hypothesis. Okay, I think that Jimmy is going to be feeling this, and I you know, I've had some experiences with Jimmy before, so I think you know, he might be a little quick and rash in this situation. I don't know, I'm making up Jimmy. And then we're going to sit with Jimmy and we're gonna have a little test, right? We're gonna be like, was I right? Is Jimmy kind of reacting the way that I thought Jimmy would? If not, I should probably change some of my assumptions. I need to be open and you'd be curious and open to surprise and flexible in this. And it just kind of goes on, right? When you're interacting with someone, you want to constantly be kind of moving and changing. So the perspective taking technique requires effort and some practice and some space, some mental space to be able to actually do it. And it's hard. There are some things that keep us, that block us from accurately engaging with someone else's point of view. This is not going to come as a surprise to anyone. And a couple of those blockers, they really fall into two groups. It's either that we're not motivated to do it, or our ability falls short and we're not very good at it, or both. So motivation has to do with, you know, oh, I see that there have been a couple of things. David says, sometimes when answering email, I don't take the time to really understand what's being said or asked before I hit send. Sure. That's, you know, David, that's a great segue. I was about to say, sometimes it's time pressure. Sometimes we just don't have enough time or don't take the time to just take a beat and be mindful and consider the very real, the reality that our perspective is just our own little sliver and filter of the world, because it makes it easier to move forward when that's all we're considering. So motivation, time plays into it. Cognitive, you know, the cognitive load that you're carrying. Are you juggling 50 million things and there's just no more brain space left for engaging in perspective taking? And these two things are in balance, because as we try it and see the benefits, we become more motivated and we get better and it becomes easier. So it's kind of a virtuous circle when we start to engage in perspective taking. And honestly, if you're looking for a little tiny foothold to get better at perspective taking, use it to apologize better. I know that sounds ridiculous, but if you find that, oh, you know what, you're not engaging in it and you just screwed up again, take a beat and engage in perspective taking and come to that person with a more genuine and authentic apology. And it can be an amazing way to mend, you know, broken trust. Yeah, David should be applauded for sharing something that I know I do. Yes, absolutely. Okay, excellent. So motivation and ability are a blocker. And I'm going to share 4 research evidence-based documented blockers that impede our ability to accurately engage in perspective taking. And I'm going to go through these quickly, but there is a a handout. Oh my gosh, that handout. Where is it's in the resources? How do people get a hold of that? Dean or Lynn, do you know?
It
I
should be in
don't.
the resources room. Let me see if I could dig up a link and drop it into chat real quick.
Yeah. Because as we go into our breakouts, we'll supply it in the chat and you'll see, but there is a handout about these blockers. But I'm just gonna go through these really quickly so we can get to our breakout session. These are fascinating though, okay? This is, oh, us humans. One of the biggest blockers is something called the fundamental attribution error. That's when we blame others. When bad things happen to them, we blame them for it. But when bad things happen to us, it's because of external situations. We know the extenuating circumstances that kept us from being excellent. Those other folks, it's their fault. So I'm really curious if anyone feels that they ever fall prey to the fundamental attribution error. Does anyone recognize this particular error? I'll give you some examples, and I'd love it if you might throw some other examples in the chat. But it's like a kid might say, well, my A is because I studied hard, but that F, well, that's because the teacher is terrible. Or I earned my position, but they definitely had someone help them. Anybody ever noticed fundamental attribution error in themselves? It's also when you stumble and you look back and you're trying to think of what tripped you up, or you kind of examine the world to see who grabbed your foot, but someone else does it and you're like, oh my gosh, they're clumsy. Oh, and David's saying like our political leaders do it. Well, I think the thing that is hard for us to understand is we all do this. It is in us. It's one of the ways that our brains try to protect us and really elevate our position in the world as the heroes of our journey. Our brains are there not just to make decisions and be rational, but our brains are here to help us be the heroes. And they're going to convince us at every turn about our superiority. And this is one of the ways that they trick us. And I think when we're engaging in perspective taking, we need to understand that we do this, so we need to dodge it. Okay, we need to consider that there aren't, that it's not the other person's fault of something, whereas we know the reasons for our own shortcomings. But we also need to recognize that they see us that way. Okay, so it's this two-way street. If you're trying to see from their perspective, they're considering that we are responsible for our shortcomings, not extenuating circumstances. So just something for us to consider when we're engaging in perspective taking. This is a two-way street. The fundamental attribution error is something that we all experience, and that we need to stop, take a breath, and listen. Let's see, Raj says, I think we all do that, but the main takeaway, which helped me to pause and think, what did I do? What was the root cause? Yes, the victim type of thought process does not help at all. I agree, Raj. I find that taking responsibility helps me feel empowered, actually, as opposed to like shameful or guilty, because if I take responsibility, then I know that I can change something. That's the way I kind of trick myself into trying to dodge this. So here's another favorite of mine, naive realism. We think we see the world as it truly is, and we expect other rational beings to see the world similarly. So basically, if we run up against someone who is challenging our worldview, we assume that they have inferior information, they're ignorant, they haven't chosen to educate themselves, or in other ways, their thinking is impoverished. So Naive realism. Whew, man, this one's a toughie. It's tough because, and I think the reason that I struggle with this one so much is that um, I don't want to get into a lot of philosophy here. I could go down the whole like, you know, what's objective versus things that are, you know, what's real, truth. Those sorts of things can really, this becomes like a very philosophical conversation. But I think that we just need to be aware that this is a bias. Again, it's a way of our brains elevating us and helping us feel superior and in control. And that other people will see us this way. If we are engaging in perspective taking and we're realizing that if we are confronting them and saying that their worldview, something they believe isn't what we believe, they will assume that we're not rational, just like we will assume they're not rational. So it's this two-way street. Some examples, you know, they think that way because they're not educated, they've been brainwashed by the media. I love this one. Our customers can't figure this out. What is wrong with them, right? What's wrong with these people who can't figure out something that is obvious? So when we are thinking about ourselves, we want to consider why we hold our perspective. Has the other person had the same experiences? You can't dodge this, folks. You can't get away from this. It's going to influence your thinking and it's going to influence your collaborators' thinking. So recognize it's in everyone. Stop, take a deep breath, and listen. And I just got to fly by these two others so that we can go into our breakout groups. This one, when we talk about cognitive biases, this is the one that everybody always thinks is what bias means. It's intergroup bias. And under this umbrella sits all kinds of, you know, nasty stuff about the way we evolved as being people who search for in-groups and want to otherize people who are not part of our in-group. So this is, you know, gender discrimination, racial discrimination, but it's amazing. You take a group of humans and you divide them in half and you give half of them blue shirts and half of them green shirts, and you have instant intergroup bias. It takes no time at all for people to choose a team and decide that the other team is inferior. So you see this, my football team is the best, my country is the best. I try not to do business with whatever group you want to fill in the blank here. They don't pay their bills. It's making those sorts of assumptions based on that intergroup bias. So when you are collaborating with someone who is outside of your group, however you define that, recognize that you need to deal with this bias and recognize that they also have this bias. It is in everyone. Stop, take a deep breath, and listen. And our last one, folks, before we go into our breakout groups, is confirmation bias. We selectively focus on information that confirms our own beliefs. And we do it beautifully in this age of social media and this age of, you know, every flavor of information and news that you want to consume out there. So confirmation bias means that if it's in line with what I think, I'm going to just hear it and high five. If it confronts my worldview, I might not even notice it or take it into my way of thinking. So when you see this bias in action, it's my way or the highway. It's saying somebody walking away from a conversation because it doesn't feel right. It's curating social media so that you don't encounter anything that challenges your worldviews. So a way to notice it in yourself, be open to surprise and revelation during collaboration. Notice that the other person has this bias as well. Stop, take a deep breath, and listen. Sandy says, women will save the planet. Awesome. That confirms my worldview. So I'm gonna read that out loud. Okay, we're gonna go into some breakout sessions. This is a fire hose of information. I'm so excited to share this with you that I know that I'm just like throwing a lot at you. But in these breakout groups, I want us to have a moment to get to know some other folks. Introduce yourselves, assign a timekeeper. We're going to give you a couple of minutes to do that. You've got 3 people in your group. Introduce yourselves, assign the timekeeper, and then that scenario that I asked you to come up with, that example of when perspective taking would have been helpful or was helpful. I want you to share that. So you'll each take a turn, 1, 2, 3, share your scenarios. And then you get 3 minutes to discuss that scenario and identify one main, find the one main perspective taking blocker that would really be a challenge there. So we've shared the blockers in chat. You can go back and refer to those. We've shared this timeline in chat. We're about to throw you into your breakout group so you can chat with one another. And then we'll come back for just a couple of minutes to wrap up. So have fun, and I might drop in to say hello while you're in there. Robin, we can't hear you.
It's okay. I had a little mini emergency, so I had to step out midstream anyway, so you're golden.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. So what the breakout rooms are discussing are times that engaging in perspective taking could really be helpful, like a specific time, and then what of the 4 like major blockers might be a really challenging one in that situation, and just giving people an opportunity to kind of apply some of those esoteric ideas to actual examples. Yeah. So did either of you have an example of a time that you really wanted to engage in perspective taking or might want to use that technique?
I have an example. So I'm in the meetings and events space is what I'm in. So obviously with COVID, that's been pretty crazy. I mean, we pivoted to virtual meetings, but we did have a lot of, not only with no income coming in, we also had a lot, because of force majeure, a lot of deposits we had to get back. So I am trying to figure out the best perspective to have on that, just because they were all so close in after we'd already planned everything and done anything, and still have to return everything. So how would that apply? If I just told you a situation, and that's probably what's on the forefront of my mind right now, so why I asked.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think of those 4 things that get in the way of us engaging accurately with someone else's perspective, and when you consider those, everything from naive realism to just thinking that that we see the world as it truly is, and others who they have inferior information, to blaming others when bad things happen to them, but understanding external circumstances when bad things happen to us, to, I don't think intergroup bias necessarily would really be the challenge there. Do the first 2 biases sound like something that would really keep you from engaging and understanding someone else's perspective?
Yeah, probably the first one.
Yeah. And even when we do understand someone else's perspective, sometimes it's not like reassuring,
Right.
but it helps us understand how to approach the conversation, understanding their perspective and getting that they will use that, they'll fall prey to that error too.
Mm-hmm.
They will think that they understand all of their circumstances, but if something bad is happening to us, it's because of something we did or didn't do. So turning this around and understanding how to give perspective as well as take perspective, it's kind of like 2 sides of the same coin. But I think that it can at least give us a way into those conversations sometimes.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Amy.
You bet, Robin. And I actually prefer Amy Lou.
Amy Lou.
I'm a good old Southern girl with a double first name.
I'm from Nashville, so I can call you Amy Lou all day long.
That's right. Well, we've got folks that are just coming back from breakout sessions. It looks like Erin, is it Fala or Fela? Bobby
Fela.
and Loy. Fela.
It's
nice
Fela.
to see you.
Yeah, it's Fela. Hi.
Hi, Fela. So as people are coming back, we were just having breakout sessions where we're really trying to apply some of those perspective blockers and understanding where we might have a real challenge. Marianne said that they rocked it. Okay, good. So we've got a little poll because I'm curious, as people participated in this, if certain of those perspective taking blockers were really thought of as more challenging than others. So, okay, we've got 20 folks and 3 of them have voted. So I'm curious what other people experienced, what they really identified as being an error that really challenged them, or a bias that challenged them, a blocker. Naive realism. I love the name of naive realism. I think that that's one that I struggle with. So I understand that other people might struggle with that one as well. So now we have 5 people who voted. I'm wondering if we might get a few more to get a little bit more of a sample here. We've got 6. And there is a downloadable sort of worksheet. I guess it's not a worksheet, it's just a handout that has all 4 of these listed. Dean, were you able to find that link and share it with folks in chat?
I did. I can reshare it if we need it again.
Yeah, let's reshare it just as people, before people leave, just so they have that, because I think it's really handy to look at. And I see 6 people have voted. Okay, so we've got intergroup bias isn't something that seems to be challenging folks. And I will say that I think that this is something that has a lot of shame around it in our, and you know, not for, I have a point of view on cognitive biases, which is I think of them as being sort of hardware in a way. Our brains work this way. And once we know that, acknowledge it and take responsibility for it, we can work against it. You know, it's like inject some new software in there. But I struggle with the shame around bias because I don't think it's useful to anyone. And I think the more, I've got like a little moth flying around here. I think the more we just acknowledge it and say, yeah, we have biases, we have things that influence us, and intergroup bias is one of the most documented ones. And I don't think we need to think of it as a shameful thing. I think that we just acknowledge it and start to talk about it, and then we're able to thwart it when we accept it. So that's my little bias soapbox. I do a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion work, so that's how I feel about that. Thank you for all those votes that have come in. It looks like, you know, these are all things that we struggle with. Naive realism is the leader right now, maybe because I've sold it because of its name, but thank you for engaging in that. We talked about, you know, the blockers that we identified. You've got that handout. And before we all leave, I want you all to remember that engaging in perspective taking, many of you say you do it all the time, and really just to come back to, you know, consider their perspective. Even if you don't have time to work your way through the biases that might be challenging you, if you have nothing else to do but move that person in the center and spend just a beat recognizing that there are other perspectives that are part of that collaboration, then we'll have really great outcomes. Outcomes will be better, pro-social outcomes. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I hope that we have an opportunity to connect. Please look for me on LinkedIn. I'm not as good about tweeting as my 22-year-old daughter would like me to be, but I do have a Twitter account, and you can also reach out to me via email. So thank you all, and have a lovely day.